And it is my pleasure to introduce you to Jason Cross. He has been working with Aditus with us for a while, and he is the co-founder and chief strategy officer for Rymedi. So Jason, will you introduce your co-panelist?
Yes, it's my great pleasure to introduce Suzanne Richardson, whom I met when she was still an official at the FDA. I was speaking at a blockchain and healthcare conference at Georgetown, and here was an FDA official who was already internally talking about the potential of blockchain to improve the pharma sector and pharma regulation. And here she was leaving leaving Bethesda to go out and learn from the technologists and entrepreneurs on the front lines. So I'll leave it to Suzanne. I'll ask you, Suzanne, to give us a bit more depth of your background, and then the way we'll structure today's session is, for those of you who don't know, I am a former professor, so we're going to have a little blockchain 101 for about 15 20 minutes, and what that might mean for the pharmaceutical sector and Aditus in particular. Then we'll have a bit of a talk show. Suzanne and I'll have a few questions prepared, and we'll discuss, and then open it up to Q&A. And we really invite any and all questions, because this is a new frontier for the pharmaceutical sector, and everyone's concerns need to be addressed as early as possible, so that our fears of the unknown don't delay implementation of what can save lives. But Suzanne, please tell us a bit more about your background and the work you did at the FDA and afterwards. Oh, you're muted, Suzanne.
I'm sorry,
Great.
Okay.
I got this.
Oh, so hi, everyone. Yes, Suzanne Richardson. I have been working in drug development, pharmaceutical development and actually medical product developments for over 20 years. I started in as I'm educated in, I'm sorry, I'm not the best speaker, but I'll get going. I went to school in Quebec City, Canada. I did my master's degree in cell biology and microbiology. After I graduated, I started a small business in redaction, editing and translation, which led to my becoming a full-fledged medical writer, regulatory writer for industry for about 10 years. In 2009, I was hired joined FDA at the New England District Office as a field inspector, and I worked in doing inspections of sponsors, drug manufacturing, clinical trial research, and good laboratory practices. So good manufacturing practices, GMP, good clinical practices, GCP, and good laboratory practices, GLP, when the GLP is more about animal studies to support future development. While at FDA, my last few years at FDA, I worked for the Office of Medical Policy, which is the policy-making office of CDER, which is the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. And while I was a project manager, in policy development, I was involved with facilitating the meetings for real-world evidence and risk-based monitoring. I became interested in blockchain just through the internet and watching some kind of internet shows and podcasts, more in the finance arena. And then I started to realize that blockchain would be really a good solution perhaps for drug and other health products development.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Suzanne. I'm
sorry. I'm sorry. I am currently working. I am working in quality assurance, and I've been working with small biotechs. And I just have one disclaimer that the opinions I share here are my own, and they are not necessarily endorsed by my past or present employers. So thank you so much. Very excited to be here.
Oh, it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm going to share a slide deck briefly. Kara, can you allow me to share? Okay, there we go.
You can share.
Wonderful. Let's see. Okay, can everyone see the slide?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. I'll give you all a little bit more background on my end, and what led me ultimately to the blockchain and healthcare space. I used to be faculty at Duke and lead a think tank on health innovation. My background is focused. It's both. I have a law degree and a PhD in the anthropology of economics, and I've always been focused on global health innovation, law, policy, and business strategies, and how these all interact in bringing innovations not just to market, but to get adopted and to be used by clinicians and patients to actually improve lives and affect outcomes. I used to do a lot of work consulting with ministries of health and NGOs in developing countries, and then engaging with pharma companies and device companies on innovative contracting and partnership models to expand global access to medicines and devices that are really breakthrough innovations, but often priced out of reach of individual patients or insurance or health, national health systems that then can't deploy these. And I saw many win-win deal structures, which to me were most important because they would save millions of lives. To the Ministry of Health were important because it would also save budget money in terms of avoidable health complications down the road, and would make pharma devices a heck of a lot more money than they were making in these markets. And some of these efforts were successful. Most were not, because of lack of multi-party trust between different organizations that would have to collaborate in the quality of the processes that each was responsible for. And more fundamentally, no one trusted each other's data, and no one trusted each other with each other's data. So I saw that there were enterprise applications of blockchain technology, some of which I will talk about in the next few minutes. And I knew this is a technology that's all about trust. It's going to streamline and enable collaboration in ways that right now are technically feasible if you can afford to hire a PwC consultant to stand next to every single person in a value chain, and then an EY consultant to audit them. But that's not feasible. So this is about automating functions that create trust across a process. So I co-founded Rymedi. I met our CEO and chief technologist, David Stefanich, and he was the CTO of a pharma manufacturer already using blockchain technology in the back end of his automation of quality management systems and quality controls in the manufacturing of medicine. So I said, bingo, Dave, you're already doing it. You're already doing it in healthcare and life sciences. And what is quality management system automation, but just making sure that at each step in a process, the right person's doing what they're supposed to, and that they're trying to do that, and that the right output comes and goes to the next step. And we can take that out of the four walls of a factory into the world of decentralized healthcare, increasingly decentralizing in order to make it more accessible, where people get screened at one organization, rapid tested somewhere else, confirmatory PCR tests at some lab in a different town, pick up prescriptions after an appointment with a doctor at yet a different town, and connect the dots and enable much higher quality and much more efficient workflows that also, with trusted data, can enable organizations to innovate business models. So we're delighted to be a foundational partner with Aditus, and to leverage our capabilities in that space to help Aditus combine several of the leading technologies of the age to really revolutionize the pharmaceutical sector. So I want to step back. Again, I'm a former professor, so we're going to look at the class syllabus here briefly. We're going to do some 101 on what blockchain technology is and what it's about and why it matters in particular for data security in pharmaceutical manufacturing, distribution, and patient engagement. And we're going to think about data security from different points of views of different stakeholders, because it's not just about, ooh, can hackers hack in? And then have a discussion with Suzanne Richardson about regulatory innovation and the regulator's perspective on this potential, and then open up the class to Q&A. So I want us to step back for a second and think from a innovation policy history of science and technology perspective on technology revolutions. And across lots of technology revolutions, we have a new force, some, chemistry or thermodynamics, unlock some new potential. Think steam power, for example. I like this example. And you can move things in ways that human mechanical force had, or even animal force, horses and other animals, and oxen, had a hard time doing. But in the early days, it was applied mainly to pump technology and so forth, because it's dangerous. You couldn't control this stuff. And then the piston is developed. And what is the piston? It begins, which is the foundation for the steam engine. It gives you control. It allows you to have greater control of how that force that's unleashed is used for certain purposes and to better manage it. So I want us to think about kind of the left side of the screen. We have foundational new technologies that bring about new utilities, new ways of doing things. They allow for new uses of a solution. They can undergird new business models, but they often come with new risks, right? Major safety risks in the case of steam power. In the digital data revolution that we're all living through since the 70s, really, information is a new force that can do all sorts of things, but it can also be very dangerous, right? It has risks, and we're going to talk about the pharmaceutical stakeholders later on, but it has risks for patients in terms of privacy violations that may just be anywhere from embarrassing and stigmatizing, still very serious, all the way to materially impacting whether someone can get life insurance because a genetic test result was released. And US law protects against genetic discrimination in health insurance, but not life insurance, right? The dangers for companies that have intellectual property, most importantly, trade secrets that they're afraid they'll lose control over, and that will really damage their ability to continue to do what they do and create whatever value they do out there. And so blockchain technology, I invite you all to think about, it's like the pistons of the IT digital age, right? We have this new force unleashed, but many of the uses of IT infrastructure that problem solvers will get together with a whiteboard and, oh, if only this organization would collaborate, and they could pull from their electronic health records, and they could see this data, etc. You kind of have these no-brainer, like, if we all just work well together, we can do everything much better and create value for everyone, most importantly, patients. And then who jumps in? The lawyers. And I say this as a lawyer. I think of blockchain technology. It's not going to do away with lawyers, but companies that use it the way we do it to get the lawyers out of the way of standing between the scientists and the entrepreneurs and the patients, or the physicians and the patients, right? So it's really about making it safe to digitize and to datafy processes that we've been able to digitize and datafy for over 20 years in healthcare, but they've been too risky to do so. So I invite you to think about it with that history of science and technology framework. So how does blockchain work? These are 5 key concepts to understand. It's okay if this is overwhelming at first. I was super overwhelmed when I was first introduced to this technology, and it just takes exposure over and over, and like developing muscle memory with any new task. your brain is going to flex neurons and new patterns, and over time begin to understand how these concepts will come together, and you'll have these aha moments. But let me just walk through these core concepts. One is public-private key cryptography, and that is a kind of cryptography that manages both access to information. There are public keys. These are cryptographic keys that sit in that can be used by any party to put in a digital keyhole, so to speak. And there are private keys that only certain individuals or organizations have. And sometimes you put certain public keys together and they allow for a digital process to execute. Sometimes they require private keys that allow for only when that private key, and therefore only when the right person or the right organization is trying to do a digital activity does that happen. So this is a foundational concept. All this technology is based on public-private key cryptography, which really made leaps and bounds in the 1990s. The second concept is distributed ledger technology. So this is the concept, and so sometimes you'll hear blockchain and DLT used interchangeably. For kind of blockchain geeks, sometimes they will specify, well, blockchains are a particular kind of DLT, because there are some that don't utilize the block mechanisms that the early blockchains all did. That's fair. But the main concept here is that the computing, that the ledger, or I like to use the example that many of us are familiar with, Google Sheets, right? Like, or an Excel sheet on the cloud where multiple parties can enter information. That is stored in a distributed way. There's not one server that has it, but it exists across a network. All right, so this is a key component of it. And append only, our third concept. That means these records are immutable records. It means these are designed where you can't delete information. They're designed where you can only add information. Now, what if I make a mistake? I have the timestamp and other metadata around the mistake I made, and then I fix it, and then the distributed ledger has a record of the fix and when that was done. So this means immutable audit trails for anything happening in this distributed computer. All right. Consensus mechanisms. Consensus mechanisms, our fourth key concept, is, all right, if the distributed computer that might exist, on my laptop and in servers across town, and maybe even do some computing on someone's smartphone in Singapore, etc. How does the emergent ledger across these different hardware devices have a shared truth, have a shared record that is consistent? And this is the domain of consensus mechanisms that different blockchain or distributed ledger technology protocols are really based on. And this is the advanced technology. And for example, with many traditional blockchain protocols, going back to Bitcoin and Ethereum and some of the others that are getting a lot of usage lately, they will pool information that it gets written onto information that gets posted, gets kind of circulated among nodes. And then there are, in the world of Bitcoin, for example, there are miners, right? And they will run these complex algorithms that will check to make sure that they will check to verify all the prior blocks that have been written down, and then they will add this new block. And the algorithm does it in a way that one has to control a majority of all the computing power within a 10-minute window in order to deviate from that. And it uses probabilistic cryptography to make that so unlikely and so costly and easily fixable so that the expense and effort exerted to do that would be far less than the loss incurred, and the network would continue to be able to continue chugging along. And fifth point, just so that you can understand better when you hear on podcasts or the internet about different layers of blockchain technology, L1, layer one technologies are these underlying protocols that have a consensus mechanism, and they are using miners or validators. There's a lot of models that don't do the sort of traditional mining, but they have different mechanisms to validate the truth. They're all doing that at the layer one layer. Avalanche, EOS, Ethereum, these are all layer one protocols. Layer three is the application layer. So these are applications that would run on these blockchain protocols and do specific things. Send money from here to there, create digital representations. If you remember the NFT craze of last year, non-fungible tokens that might be traded or swapped between people. This is all at the L3 application layer. And then L2, think of as middleware. And it's about making these two layers work well together. And so some L1 layers are not very fast, or some are very costly to operate. And so an L2 product might live in the middle. And if it's very costly and very slow, it might batch together a bunch of digital activity that happens at layer 3, so it's cost effective for those solutions to run on that layer 1, even though it's slow and expensive. Benefits and features of blockchain. Think also, please, from the kind of pharmaceutical sector perspective. One is data and network security. So information on blockchains, and one is whatever's written onto these blockchain networks. They might be publicly viewable information, publicly readable. Most enterprise uses of it, such as with Rymedi, there's no viewability of any information. It's just gibberish hashes, cryptographic codes, pure gibberish, that within a blockchain-based system that uses that, all of a sudden can have meaning for an organization, a pharma company, for example, that uses it. And that gibberish all of a sudden becomes meaningful data about patients, about pharmaceutical compliance documentation, what have you. But because the network is distributed, there are certain advantages versus when it comes to cybersecurity. And the fact that data can't be deleted, you have immutable audit records. This has massive data security value. Data integrity is a way of talking about the immutable records. Again, you can't cheat on the chain. You can cheat off the chain, but you can't, when something's up on there, it can't be deleted, right? You can change it, but everyone will have a view that it was changed. And even if the underlying information is not publicly viewable, whoever has visibility into that will be able to see that that was changed. There's huge implications for anywhere in pharma where you need audit trails. Third, this is very important. Fine-grained, need-to-know access to information. Now, in traditional database structures, you have these hierarchies of different kinds of access in big sort of boxes. And depending on your role as an administrator or a sub-administrator, you might have access to certain things. The way that blockchain uses cryptographic keys to grant access means I can grant 1,000 different individuals and organizations 1,000 different cryptographic keys to 1,000 different subsets of information, only based on what they need to know for a particular purpose, and feel pretty good sharing that, because each one only gets what they need, and none of them have enough to connect enough dots to to pose risk, if I'm concerned about patient privacy and patient identification, or if I'm concerned about intellectual property of my company, trade secrets being divulged, etc. So this is a very important feature. And then the fourth is growing in importance over time. And with the AI machine learning revolution that we're living through, will really have massive impact in the next few years. And this has to do with cryptographic proofs, or what in the blockchain world they talk about as zero knowledge proofs. And it's the idea that I can prove something to myself or to a third party without having visibility into the underlying state that is being proven. And so this has huge implications in healthcare and life sciences, where for good reasons, organizations are really hesitant to pool information for all of the security safety reasons I mentioned. But in the domain, for example, of AI, we're seeing federated learning, where machine learning algorithms can mine across different data silos. But everyone needs to know that the mining is happening on what's supposed to be there, right? Not that it's mining or it's a model's being trained on across data silos, and what it's supposed to be trained on isn't there, or only part of the information. So blockchain technology allows for cryptographic proof without revealing the underlying information. This means that we can use AI in use cases where organizations are not going to allow human beings to see their secret sauce or to see sensitive information, but we can still end up creating AI value out of it. A few uses in industry today. Everyone's familiar with alternative currencies and accounting and the world of cryptocurrencies, and fintech, the domain of using this technology to offer financial and banking technologies that at lower cost, lower fees, faster transmission of value. This is domain in the developing world of banking the bankless. A lot of people don't have access to banking institutions, and these applications can be helpful for that. Digital assets, we're seeing it being applied to creating more efficient markets for real estate investment, for intellectual property, etc. Identity management is one domain. The US federal government uses blockchain in a variety of ways for identity management. Credentials, I get some training, and for example, in the medical credential space, there's huge expense and pain in the butt. And when doctors have to have credentials recertified every year, et cetera, and once they're done once, or once you get your credentials certified for one purpose, having a cryptographic verification for a third party to trust that and not have to go through all of that again can create tremendous efficiencies in lots of industries. Maersk, shipping, Walmart, they use blockchain in supply chain tracking. As I mentioned, permission data sharing, health information exchanges are beginning to use that. Automating compliance, which we'll dig into in the pharmaceutical sector. And I did give the example of federated AI machine learning. So why does blockchain matter? It's a data quality and data use trust technology. It's about creating trust where there's not enough of it, and therefore we do things more inefficiently, or in healthcare, we just don't do them because it's so inefficient that there's not a strong market for it, that we just, it just doesn't get done. And so keys to that trust are the security, integrity, controlled access, and transparent verifiability, right? So it's cryptographic verifiability of things that are transparent to everyone with IT skills, without actually having to show the sensitive information underneath. Now, I've borrowed this slide from Aditus's recent presentations. Beautiful illustration of the Aditus model of applying blockchain-powered pharmaceutical quality controls and quality management systems to changing the game in making, distributing, and tracking medicines and their outcomes in any market. But launching this in Africa is going to have a tremendous impact where these trust issues are even stronger. Just to kind of, explain this, it means we can have immutable records about certificates of analysis. So these are these regulatory documents that say the raw materials that just got shipped in from South Africa to make, or India to make this medicine, they are what they are, the right signatures are on them, etc. And remove a lot of bureaucracy around that. Again, you have these little, these symbols that show that this is all highly secure, data encrypted, it gets written onto these ledgers. And then at the bottom of the image, you see that selective permission access only on a need-to-know basis can be provided to regulators who could see things in real time that in the past they couldn't. And maybe as our discussions with some regulators in Africa are already moving forward, maybe we're changing the risk-benefit calculus for them, saying, look, the red tape exists because you have little information and you got to protect the public. We give you more information. Can we have less red tape? Can we maybe get to market faster? All of that begins to create a business case, creates business value for doing things better and doing things more transparently with regulators and with large purchasers like a hospital system, and ultimately with patients, where they could verify the quality of a product with the QR code and any phone that can capture that QR code. So we can dig into this more in the Q&A, but I wanted to give you all sort of, a broad introduction to the technology and the ways that we might apply it in the pharmaceutical sector. And I now invite Suzanne to join me in the discussion. And I'd like to start, Suzanne, with the following question, right? Given the immutable records and the data integrity that blockchain provides to compliance documentation and reporting, how would regulatory agency responsibilities benefit? In other words, how do regulators have their lives made simpler? How might it streamline current standard practices?
Well, I think one of the things that you said right from the beginning is, and probably the most critical, is that it establishes trust. And I think that is one of the, biggest concerns is, regulators depend on the data that they receive to make critical decisions that affect a lot of people. So that you and put yourself in the place of a regulator who's got data in front of them, hasn't really gone, not really, that's been passed down to them. And you have to get together with your colleagues and make a decision that's going to affect patients, companies, and, so that the trust is very important. I want to say now, I would like to talk a little bit about the regulators. They want change. They are innovative. They hunger for innovation. And I think that what's been kind of impeding the adoption of novel technologies is the industry's fear of change. So even though I've witnessed this a few times, so where in FDA, I'll speak for FDA, they are, crying out for change, crying out for risk-based approaches, crying out for single audit, having industry contract out auditing instead of they're doing inspections. So all these efforts that the FDA has made have kind of fallen on deaf ears because industry is too afraid to change the status quo. Does that answer your question?
Oh, that's very helpful. And it makes me think of, I think one of the interesting things about the Aditus approach is, industry is afraid of change, but they are so not trusting of anyone, including regulators, right? And so the traditional dynamic is, laws get passed, regulations written, and then agencies execute, sometimes in some places, those regulations according to spec, and industry shares only the minimum it needs to, right? Because if you ever share more than you need to, if you ever detect yourself more than you need to, and therefore have an obligation to report it, or if you end up actually reporting more information than you need to, and there's a problem there, right? That's like a negative, even though that's actually good for patients, right? Because it's not like by not knowing something, it didn't exist. But the standard practice is share only what you have to. And part of the Aditus approach to flipping the script is, no, actually, we are in this for the quality and for the patient, right? Making the medicines is just a part of the value chain to better outcomes for the patients. So we want to be a team player with you, and we're going to share more than the law requires us to. Now, and this leads to my next question. Now, given that approach, and given that we want to do so in a way that's really simple for you as regulators or as large procurement agencies who themselves will audit, UNICEF audits manufacturers it buys from, for example, can we get value from that, right? Because if we can, then others will start adopting these kinds of high quality standards, right? And that's ultimately what we want, right? We want to make it good for business to do the right thing. And the right thing is to track as much as possible, cost effectively, and to be as open as possible and teaming up with regulators and other partners to do what's best for patients. So the next question is, since properly configured blockchain systems can be used to provide regulators real-time visibility into manufacturing and distribution quality systems in secure ways that protect the data rights of all parties, patients, supply chain partners, your own IP, how might regulation innovate to accelerate processes for industry with that greater visibility and reduction in risk? I want to also let me put it another way too. I think it'll help for the audience as well. Same question, but put another way. We've seen the FDA and other regulators fast track approvals for new drugs where the clinical trial data is not enough to justify approval alone. But where the manufacturers provide additional controls on the quality of patient use, additional means of monitoring quality in market with real-world evidence and post-market studies, what the FDA, for the whole audience, what the FDA calls REMS, risk evaluation and mitigation strategies. We've seen many accelerated approvals from the FDA and other regulators with close regulator monitoring of what's going on until the post-market data ends up providing the level of comfort that they say, okay, now we feel good about it, and maybe we don't need to monitor as much or as often, et cetera, right? So the question is, we're doing that, REMS-based accelerated approvals, in approving new products when we don't have enough clinical trial data to meet the standard. Can we have the equivalent fast tracking of processes in manufacturing when the regulator has heightened visibility into quality data, into quality processes, and real-time trusted visibility into the manufacturer's culture of quality and their proactive monitoring of product and rapid responses to these issues? And I frame it that way because they're already doing it and getting new things to market. Question is, if we go beyond standards in manufacturing quality disclosure, can we see that in manufacturing potentially?
Well, I'm going to say there's a lot to unpack there, Jason, but let me say this. What you're talking about, not only is there going to be an advantage to it, but there's actually going to be an obligation to do that. And there's a fairly recent program, and I'm talking about manufacturing now, called CASA, which is not, let me just make sure I get my acronym right. Knowledge assessment, oh, sorry. Anyway, knowledge management, something structured
We can
assessment.
look it up later. Don't worry about it.
Yes,
Tell
I'm
us what
sorry.
it is.
And
Tell
I
us what
wrote
it
it
is.
here, but so what CEDAR, this Office of Product Quality, is with CEDAR, again, Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, and they're the ones that have that responsibility to review manufacturing applications. And this CASA is an effort, it's going to be required eventually, where manufacturers are going to have to submit data in a digital form. So it allows FDA to make structural application data and capture critical assessment information in a structured format. So right now it's in data for manufacturing. Let's talk about new manufacturing, the manufacture of new drugs. Even if it's a conventional way to manufacture, it's still, you have to show that your process is, let's say, fit for purpose. So industry is going, this is coming very, and I saw this a presentation from the leader at CEDAR, who's leading the charge on CASA, K-A-S-A, and he's very single-minded about his expectations, and that, because right now, like, the data are being submitted in unstructured text, cut and paste tables, and it's just not they're not able to handle management.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah.
So maybe the use of blockchain will have to keep in mind this very near future, a change that I think we'll see.
Yeah, and it will have to make sure it's meeting those reporting structures, data format structures.
Yes.
And that's related to the next question, which is, if
yeah, and I guess what I'm saying, yeah, there will be an expectation. So I think you can have solutions using blockchain to hasten the use of that digitization and digitalization of data. The FDA and the other regulators are going to be very eager to see your solutions.
And maybe it'll help them get adoption if the blockchain helps the companies that might be nervous about digitizing, and then that, trade secrets can get out. So
one of the things I did want to say that's a follow on from your first question is that, so we have this situation where the regulators are crying out to join their programs to innovate. Industry fears change. Then you go back with, well, in a way, yes, they're told, yes, please use this innovative technology. Then they use it. And then someone else who didn't get the memo, as going back to the old ways, let's say. So those pioneers, though, will get support and will have a voice with the leadership at FDA and other regulators. So I think, and I've thought about this often, does my company want to take the risk, but be a pioneer and maybe also gain the benefit of having been a pioneer in this innovation? And I just want to say, just another, how I know that this is going, FDA is going to certainly be more open and eager to hear about blockchain, is that in their 2023 budget, they have set aside money to develop these, their IT and their ability to interact with the industry. And the what they named as a breakthrough cutting edge technology, the example they gave was blockchain. So I saw that as a very clear message that FDA is definitely working on this.
That's fantastic. I'm going to skip my next questions so that we can open the floor, because I'm sure there's a ton of questions that everyone has.
Yeah.
Kara, have you begun to assemble any we want to
I
discuss?
have one that I can read it to you.
Please.
It says, given just a small market share of Aditus in Kenya, why would shippers, distributors, providers follow a separate production handling for it and invest into personnel, training, time, and equipment?
That's a great question. I would say that there's several aspects to that question. One is sort of upstream suppliers of like raw materials, and then two is downstream distributors. One is it's got to be super simple, and that's part of what Rymedi specializes in. It's got to involve outside of Aditus, the integration with those supply chain partners has got to be super simple, so they don't have to do much training at all. Sync with their existing workflows, leverage current ERP technologies or distribution technologies. For example, UPS's soon to be ubiquitous worldwide use of RFID tagging to track things and so forth. So the outside of where Aditus does have control, it's going to be really crucial that the deployment of the technology be super simple and leverage as much existing infrastructure as possible. And really, I mean, this was the lesson we saw in EHRs in the healthcare world, right? They were designed for administrators by engineers, not for nurses who are their primary users. And it took a long time to actually get their buy-in. And now there's still ripple effects from the design failures of not designing with the clinical encounter, the patient and the clinician first, but rather, starting with billing and engineers and getting to the patient and clinicians last. Another question?
We have Doug Mendehall. If you want to just say it, that you have to raise your hand. So just go ahead.
Sure. I haven't heard anything. I can say this from the perspective of having been in industry for a long time, but now being over 10 years distance from it, I would try to represent this as an industry position. But if somebody presented, the general concept to me, one of the things that would immediately come to mind is just inadvertent disclosure of something that turns out to be a competitive advantage. And I don't think a lot of people, unless you're in the game, appreciate how often, 2-3 companies are competing very intensely on a mechanism. And, I know one example where the difference in filing was a couple of weeks, and anybody who knows the business, first to file is huge. Mm-hmm. And so that you would share some information, not even knowing that they didn't know, but then when you've enabled that, they wind up, kind of. So as somebody in management and industry, you're saying, why would I take the risk of sharing something that might enable my competition?
100%, and that's why. So currently, non-blockchain based data systems are much more prone to that inadvertent disclosure, and because of the need to know based access with cryptographic keys of blockchain, you have much greater certainty that only some subset of information that you want to share with only a particular party is what's shared. Now, what if you make a mistake and you share that the other subset of information? If the blockchain architecture is appropriately configured to address these kind of life science specific concerns, such as ours, we've designed it so that even what's posted to the public permissionless blockchain that provides the transparency is never the underlying information. They're only gibberish cryptographic hashes. So you get the advantage of an immutable audit trail when you want to audit that okay, we did submit this and it wasn't changed, etc. But if a customer organization or a partner is like, oh, I made a mistake, I want to delete it, you can delete the information where it lives unencrypted or encrypted, but in a readable way, not gibberish. You can delete it there, and then in the audit trail hash that it provides that immutable verifiability, what we do is we break a pointer there. So you still have the ability to say, oops, I didn't mean to, and delete that. But also the cryptographic keys compared to other database technologies allow you to do it much more safely. Now, sharing data with blockchain will never be as secure as just not sharing data. That's 100% secure, right? And it's a really, Douglas, you raise a great concern. There will still be use cases where some parties won't want to share even the sub piece of information for that sort of fear. Now, what we'll see in the market is, will those that are too cautious be at a competitive disadvantage over time? Because those that appropriately understand the risk and calibrate their sharing as a result of it have a competitive advantage. We'll see. I don't know, but that's part of what we're all exploring together. That's a fantastic question.
Yeah, I was more thinking that you don't know what the other guy doesn't know, and you've inadvertently, unlocked an insight to them that you may have know uniquely. So something about a mechanism of action that is going on, or safety. You just don't know. So the safe course is don't tell them.
Don't tell. 100%.
Don't put it out there.
Yeah. And
even to the regulatory agencies. I mean, ultimately, you put it out to the regulatory agencies in your filing, but once you file, you've taken a big competitive step.
Yep. And so there's some information you'd want to share with regulators and some that you wouldn't at a given moment in time. And at a later moment, some of that stuff that you didn't want to share, you'd be willing to. And we're going to have capitalism happen, right? We're going to have competitive markets and companies that are willing to be more proactive and thoughtful about how they use these technologies to actually gain advantage in maybe getting approved faster, having winning procurement bids because they will guarantee the quality in a way their competitors couldn't. There will be some business advantages, and we'll see if in the market that those create the pull for greater adoption of these standards. But a really fantastic point, Douglas. Other questions?
We have
Jason,
about
do you mind
2
if I
minutes.
may I make a little comment here?
Yes, please, Suzanne.
Is that okay? So I just a reminder, and when you are an FDA and probably EMA and other agencies, very much encourage industry to communicate early in your application, in your development process with FDA, and they are very amenable to meeting and discussing issues. So I think I'm not, this is any concerns, like if there is a desire to use blockchain, any concerns can be shared with the agency, and they would love to hear that feedback because that informs them on how they should develop their own policies. And I did want to make a plug for the emerging technology team, which is a specialized team at FDA. It's been there for a few years, and they are very open to novel and unique technologies. You can meet with them and they will spend a lot of time. You get a lot of FaceTime with them to come and share your technology. They are the ones, they are kind of the gatekeepers for the rest of the manufacturing review division on novel and unique technologies that need a little more research into them to see if they are acceptable. And we'll share those links with you at the end.
Yes, and Suzanne actually was on that committee for a time, so she
yes, and I was very proud to work for the agency when I saw how very open they were. There is no big, thick, high and strong wall between the FDA and industry. You're like, come on in and share your, so it really wonderful experience working there. It was an eye opener.
More questions?
We have time for one more question. Dr. Khoury?
I think two comments. One is that it's pretty obvious that Aditus ought to do this. That's one comment. And mostly because I think it needs to be a pioneer. It needs to show what the heck can be done and set some standards, especially in an area such as Africa. I think it might be able to be done under that sort of scenario. It'd be very difficult to do it here in the States, for example, at the outset, and it is proven to be somewhat difficult because of what Doug just mentioned. But I do think that there are two other stakeholders, my other comment, that don't want to necessarily see all this transparency. One of them is the politicians that'll dictate a heck of a lot what's going on. And they don't want to listen to logic. They don't want necessarily to listen to everything that you just laid out as to be obvious that you need to do this because they don't want to see change. And seemingly what's happening here is a movement toward the judiciary branch here, even in the United States, to be also, let's say, less likely, they don't want to see as much transparency either, and they don't want to see so much change. And so it's not that easy to now to figure out what's going on, but I think you could do some of what we're talking about here in Africa, and I think should be done. But how to do this in a way that the politicians themselves can still see the beauty of it, the advantage of it, I think is going to be difficult, but I think it's beyond our control right now to figure out how to do it, but I think we just have to be aware of it. Sorry.
Those are great comments, Dick. And my response is I agree with you wholeheartedly on both counts. It'll be easier to do this new approach first in Africa, have the regulator agencies, come and observe. I think you're adding another element to this for Darren and the Aditus leadership team. Once we've got the FDA and EMA coming out to visit and be part of things, that's when we also start bringing senators and members of the House, right? And just kind of key strategic ones. But part of the industry transformation, and it's not going to be overnight, it may take 20 years, is going to be commercial success. This is why Aditus has to be commercially successful. It can't be the nonprofit or subsidized, corner of global need where these things get deployed. It has to be commercially successful and begin to inspire competitors to adopt this in that market and in other markets, and partner with big pharma in the markets where it's not going to focus on around value propositions that will make even big pharma more money. And we will begin to see, I bet, parts of the industry that start doing this, parts that don't. And if commercial success can accrue to those that are, not only does that slowly bring more and more on board to that side, but then they have the lobbying money, Dick, and they start working places. And the beautiful example of this is the open source software transition, right? So 1999, you got Bob Young in our backyard in Raleigh, right? Getting Red Hat going. It was laughable because open source software is the domain of, hobbyists in their pajamas in their basements, hackers and academics who already have a secure salary and don't need to worry about sharing stuff for free, right? And the idea that, they would be in markets competing against IBM and Microsoft and not go bankrupt within a couple of years. But by 2005, they're taking market share from IBM so much that IBM reinvents itself in the Red Hat model, sells off what becomes Lenovo, starts throwing patents into the Linux Foundation. I mean, what the heck? By late 2000s, Google sees that the future of the internet is mobile, ubiquitous access. So its Android play, it launches as an open source technology. And when Microsoft names its new CEO, Satya Nadella, that was an earthquake. The one VP in all Microsoft who was pro open source. And today, 95% of the world's IT infrastructure runs on open source free software, and we build proprietary things on top. Now, the political side of it also, at the beginning, politicians were fighting it because Microsoft was paying them to. And I was in Madrid when the Ministry of Education was about to announce an open source initiative, and it got canceled the day before, and 20,000 free Microsoft laptops all of a sudden appeared and stuff. And right. And today, Microsoft is the biggest contributor. It spends billions investing in open source technology that is free and closes the digital divide. And so, Dick, you know, my dream is that we catalyze something similar in pharma. We play the role of a kind of pharma Red Hat that gets things going, but it's going to mean that process is it has to be commercially successful, and it has to eventually, some of us become big players, or big players like IBM switching business models come over, and then their lobbyists start pushing for this. And again, it might be a while. It will be a while, but it's the fight worth fighting, because lives are in the line, my friends.
Well, thank you, Jason. Thank you, everyone. I think we're out of time. If you have any additional questions, I'm happy to receive them. My email is chiara.kansi@medaditus.org. Send them over, and I'll have Suzanne and Jason respond, and I will send them over. I want to thank Suzanne. Thank you, Jason, for taking the time. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Don't miss our next month Brown Back Lunch talk. Topics and speakers to be announced. So I would like to again thank you, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you, Chiara.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.